Well, thank you everyone for joining us today on our MDA Advocacy Institute. My name is Mark Fisher. I am the Advocacy Engagement Manager here at the Muscular Dystrophy Association. I'm thrilled you're here for a special edition of the MDA Advocacy Institute. As many of you know, this Sunday is Rare Disease Day, and that is celebrated all over the world. And because of that, we wanted to dedicate our February Institute to rare disease policy. We thought it was the perfect time to do that. And we have a great lineup of speakers and content for you. So here's a quick rundown of what we're chatting about today. We thought that we'd break this into three issue buckets around rare disease policy. One is newborn screening. And the second is probably something that everyone is thinking about right now, which is access to the COVID-19 vaccine. And then we'll finish up with policy talk on therapeutic development. Throughout the entire time, feel free to put questions in the Q&A box. We'll either answer them during the section or we'll have time at the end for questions as well. So feel free to please put some questions in. Before I introduce our panel, I wanted to do a quick plug for the MDA Advocacy Network, our grassroots program. If you're not a member, we really would love to have you. We can talk about all this policy and all the things we want to do, but we really need grassroots advocates behind us to make it a reality. So please join the MDA Advocacy Network. There's the URL on the bottom of your screen, which is mda.org/advocacy, or you can text MDA USA to 50457. So we'd love to have you along with us. So please join if you haven't already. So here's our panel of speakers. We are joined by Brittany Hernandez, who is MDA's Senior Director of Policy and Advocacy. We also have Paul Melmeyer with us. He is MDA's Director of Regulatory Affairs. And last and certainly not least, we're really excited to have a special guest. It's Rachel Sher. She is the Vice President of Policy and Regulatory Affairs at the National Organization for Rare Disorders. She has an impressive background, but I will give you the Cliff Notes versions and then I'll have her introduce herself. Rachel, as I said, is the Vice President of Policy and Regulatory Affairs at NORD. Before coming to NORD, she served as the Senior Policy Analyst in the Commissioner's Office of Policy at the US FDA, where she acted as the FDA lead in the 21st Century Cures legislative process. 10 years before joining the FDA, Rachel served as Senior FDA Counsel for then-ranking member Henry Waxman, who was the leading author of the 1983 Orphan Drug Act, and she served both on the Democratic Committee staff of the Energy and Commerce Committee and in his personal office. So that is the Cliff Notes version of her remarkable bio. She has over 20 years of experience in health policy. So we are just thrilled to have her with us. Rachel, I'll turn it over to you for any more introduction. Tell us a little bit about NORD, and then after that, we'll get on with the program.
Well, thank you, and thank you so much for having me here today. I'm thrilled to have the opportunity to be here with all of you, and particularly during this week, which is Rare Disease Day week. We call it Rare Disease Day is February 28th, and there's all kinds of activities this week, so and next week actually. So this is a very timely meeting, and really excited to have the opportunity to be here with you. I don't need to say anything more about my background. I think you did a great job, so thank you very much. But I will tell you a little more about NORD. NORD has been around since the early 80s. NORD was actually instrumental in getting the Orphan Drug Act passed and into law, working with my former boss, Mr. Waxman. And since then has really grown. We have programs across a bunch of different areas that work on the rare disease community's needs. We have programs around research, we have programs around education. As you know, I'm in the policy realm, so I oversee everything we do at the federal level, including work on Capitol Hill and with all the federal regulatory agencies like CDC, FDA, NIH, CMS. And we also have a large network and staff at the state level too, as I think we're going to talk about today. We have an ambassador program with volunteers in almost all states now to really help us kind of further our reach at the state level, addressing rare disease policy issues within the states. So definitely encourage you to check out our website. There's a lot there, rarediseases.org, if you have other questions about what NORD does. And just excited to get into the conversation and be here with you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Rachel. We are so glad that you are here. And I'll just say to everyone on the call that Rachel is one of our most common partners in our work that we do on the Hill. We work really closely with NORD on a number of issues. The first of which that we want to talk about today is newborn screening. And so I think that, you know, in general, we have had a lot of educational activity for the neuromuscular community around newborn screening. But Rachel, I wanted to put a question to you about, you know, the importance of newborn screening for the larger rare disease community or public health at large, and why does NORD work so hard on this issue, and what is NORD hoping to gain from a new authorization?
Yeah. And we're very happy to have you all to partner with on this too. You know, newborn screening is an issue that NORD has advocated on at both the state and federal level for many years. And that's because we know that there are many, many rare diseases that can be detected at birth. And when those diseases or disorders are detected at birth and treated very quickly, the outcomes are so much better in the end. We have so many stories from our advocates, you know, with both very happy stories where they, you know, caught something very early because of newborn screening, got early treatment, and are on a good path. And then unfortunately, we have very difficult stories where had a particular state screened a newborn for a particular rare disease, and had they gotten early treatment, the outcome would have been so much better. So I think that is, in a nutshell, why we care so much about it. I mean, I think it's one of those public health programs that has been around for a long time and just has a demonstrated track record of success. I mean, all you need to do in so many cases is just figure out that a newborn has a particular condition and then get on a treatment plan quickly, and the outcomes are so much better than if you don't do that. So we really care about making sure that the programs at the state level are well funded and screened for as many conditions as possible, and then at the federal level they're doing everything they can to help with you know, the newborn screening across the country.
Great, thank you. Yeah, and I'll just add to that, you know, for the neuromuscular disease community in particular, there are two conditions that the federal government recommends that are neuromuscular conditions that the feds recommend that every state screen babies for, and those are SMA and Pompe. And like Rachel said, you know, the addition of those conditions to that national list can make, you know, the critical difference between a child getting treatment early and, you know, very early after they are born, and not even knowing that, you know, their family not even knowing that they have the condition, let alone getting connected to treatment. And so it's critically important for the neuromuscular community and every other community whose conditions are included on that national list. So Rachel, can you give a quick update on what's happening in Congress with the newborn screening program? How are they working towards authorization and also funding? And then I'll talk a little bit about what's happening in the states as well.
Yeah. So at the federal level, there are a few different programs operated out of the federal agencies, including CDC and NIH and others. Those programs all operate under what's called an authorizing statute. So it's a statute that sort of directs the different programs to do the work that they do. That program and in the statute has a date that we refer to as a sunset date. So Congress wrote the law, but said that by a certain date it's going to expire, and Congress would have to come back and essentially reenact the law. Unfortunately, the authorizing statute expired the year before last, 2019. And so those programs are continuing to operate. There's nothing that is prohibiting them from doing everything that they had been doing before. So that's the good news. They need to have continued funding, though, to be able to do that. And another piece of good news, the appropriators, so the part of Congress that gives money and passes legislation to give money to the federal government, to all these agencies, the congressional appropriations committees have been continuing to fund the program. So that is good too. But, you know, as we've been working with Brittany and other partner organizations, it's much better to have these programs operating under a statute that is updated and clearly spelling out what now Congress wants these programs to be doing. So we've been working very hard to get that done. And there is just now, this is the beginning of a new Congress, just as of January, and all legislation that was not passed in the previous Congress has to be reintroduced. So another piece of good news is we have a bill that both of our organizations support and want to see move forward that was just introduced in the House and the Senate. And so we're going to be working very hard to push that legislation forward in the coming weeks. The committees on both the Senate and the House will have to hold hearings likely, and so it may take some time, but we are going to be continuing to work very hard to get that program reauthorized while we continue to, and again, we've done this with MDA, continue to push the part of Congress that gives the money to these programs to do just that. We're working on getting a letter together to really push Congress to give adequate funding to all these newborn screening programs, even though the authorizing statute has not been put into place just yet.
Thanks, Rachel. That's a great overview. And I'll say, you know, on the state side of things, MDA is really involved in advocating for implementation of screening for conditions on that national list. Now, every state gets to decide, you know, kind of what conditions they are capable of screening infants for, and Pompe disease and SMA, which are the only two neuromuscular conditions on the list, happen to be the most recently added ones to that list as well, which means that they are the ones that haven't been, you know, as quickly or as recently implemented by the states. And so we are continuing to work with states to press for implementation of those conditions, and, you know, are also hopeful that many states will continue to add them, and we have seen lots of success here over the last couple of years since they have both been added to the rest, and are working towards further implementation. But Rachel, thank you for that overview of what's happening in Congress. There's definitely a lot going on, and we're hopeful for, you know, quick action here in the very near future, so that the program can be authorized again and continue on with its high levels of funding, which are critical in both on the federal side and state side. So last question I want to pose to you is to, you know, talk a little bit about the process for getting new conditions added to newborn screening. Obviously, you know, MDA wants to see infants screened as soon as possible for any condition for which, you know, treatment is available and screening is appropriate at birth. But what is the, you know, what does it look like to actually get a condition added to the rest, and what is NORD's kind of position there and role with addition of new conditions?
So it's kind of a two-part process. Under the newborn screening authorizing statute that we were just talking about, there's an advisory committee at the federal level comprised of all kinds of medical experts to really look at what conditions lend themselves to being screened for at birth and then ultimately treated, hopefully, because again, that's the whole point of newborn screening is early identification and treatment. So there's an advisory committee that looks at conditions and adds those conditions that they think are appropriate for newborn screening programs at the state level to what's called the Recommended Uniform Screening Panel. There's so many acronyms in DC that we just call them by the acronym and then forget what the actual words are, but it's RUSP that we refer to them as. So they make recommendations for conditions to be added to the RUSP, but ultimately they're just that, they're recommendations to the states. The states run their own newborn screening programs. And then the states decide which conditions from the RUSP they will actually test for within their states. And that's part of the reason why we end up with some of those situations that I described at first, that we have very positive stories where states have decided to screen for instance, all conditions on the RUSP, and something got detected and treated early, whereas some states don't screen for everything that's on the RUSP. And if you happen to live in that state where your baby has a condition that wasn't tested for, then you see some very unfortunate situations. So NORD advocates at the state level for all states to screen for everything that is on the RUSP. I will say that states, particularly now in COVID, have very difficult budgetary situations, and there are definitely cases where states don't screen for everything because they don't have the money to screen for everything. So we also advocate for adequate funding for newborn screening programs at the state level. And we also advocate for making sure that when conditions are added to the RUSP, that there's an expeditious process at the state level to then add those conditions to the state screening panel to make sure that it matches up, and that it doesn't take 2 years for a state to add that condition to the panel so that the babies in those states are not being screened. I'll make a plug here, and I think we're going to have time towards the end to talk about this too, but NORD has year after year put out what we call a state report card, where we grade the states on how they're doing on newborn screening and many other issues. So in our state report card, you can look at how your state is doing with respect to newborn screening. And we look at those things that I just mentioned and many other aspects of the newborn screening program if you want more information on a particular state.
Thanks, Rachel. And MDA also has a resource available on this on the MDA advocacy site that will show implementation of both SMA and POMPEI in the states. I will also say that we are proud at MDA to be funding a project in partnership with RTI in North Carolina to add Duchenne to the early check screening program in that state. And the reason that we are funding this project is twofold. One, because we want babies to get screened for Duchenne, but two, we're hoping that the data gleaned from this project run by RTI can be utilized to help support a RUSP nomination for Duchenne here in the near future. There are a couple of other pilot projects that screen infants for Duchenne. Right now, there's one ongoing in New York that's kicked off and been very successful, and there's also other data from other states and pilots that have wrapped. And we're hopeful that all of the information and data from those projects can be utilized together for a really successful nomination for Duchenne here in the near future. And we hope that that everyone will keep an eye on that because we are very excited about it. All right, well, thank you, Rachel. We can hit the next slide. Oh, this is the map I was just talking about. So you can see implementation status in the states for both SMA and POMPEI, and this is also available on the MDA Advocacy website. You can just go to mda.org/advocacy. And if you want to get involved in advocating for implementation of newborn screening for neuromuscular conditions on the state level, we want to hear from you. We are able to provide you with the resources that you need to contact policy makers and legislators in your area and in your state to advocate on behalf of implementation of newborn screening for SMA and POMPEI, and would love to be in touch with anyone who has interest in doing that. So reach out to us. You can email us at advocacy@mdausa.org to find out how to get more involved. Thanks, Mark. I'll turn it over to Paul.
Well, thank you very much, Brittany, and good afternoon, everybody. I am Paul Melmer. I am MDA's Director of Regulatory Affairs, and we want to move on to our second conversation topic for today, and that is access to the COVID-19 vaccine. As everyone knows, there are two FDA-authorized vaccines on the market right now, those being from Pfizer-BioNTech and from Moderna, and pretty much on the forefront of just about everybody's mind these days is when can I get the vaccine and how? So let's talk about this in the rare disease community. Rachel, I wanted to ask you, are individuals with rare diseases eligible to obtain the COVID-19 vaccine right now?
There we go. So this is a complicated question, like much else with the pandemic. I will say that, again, along with MDA, NORD hosted a webinar I guess it was about a month ago, with FDA and with CDC that was geared toward questions that the rare disease community has with respect to the vaccines. So we can get that link to the webinar itself, maybe in the chat even, and make sure that you see that there is this opportunity for you to hear directly from FDA. It was Dr. Marks and prior Commissioner FDA, Dr. Hahn, along with Dr. Cohn from the CDC. So we will, I think today, be able to touch on some of that, but please know that that is an on-demand resource there for you, and they answered, an hour's worth of questions that we have heard from the rare disease community. So in a nutshell, the way that it is working right now is that CDC is issuing what are called prioritization levels, and looking across the spectrum of everyone. Obviously, ultimately, everyone in the whole world hopefully will get vaccinated against COVID. But in the beginning of rolling out these vaccines, there's limited supply. So really tough decisions have had to be made about who should get it first. And CDC puts out guidelines about when and who should get the COVID vaccine. And then it's ultimately up to the states to take a look at how much vaccine they have, look at the needs in their states, and decide whether to follow CDC's guidance on that. So we're seeing a pretty disparate response thus far in terms of states rolling out the vaccines. They started with frontline workers, with hospital personnel and EMTs who are treating COVID positive patients every day and actually in danger. So that's the first level. Then they go on, and ultimately the third level they have specified as people who are at high risk for various conditions. On CDC's website, they spell out what a lot of those conditions are. But unfortunately, as is the case with so many rare diseases as a general category are not listed there. But as we know, there are many patients with rare diseases that have conditions or diseases that put them at much higher risk of severe complications if they get COVID. So what we have done, along with Paul and MDA, is to really push CDC to make it explicit to the states that when we're talking about that third category in terms of the prioritization of people who are at high risk, that rare diseases be explicitly included. Because what we're seeing is that states that are even providing the vaccine for this third category for high risk individuals at this point are looking just at the words that are on CDC's website. So if it doesn't say rare diseases or spell out what rare diseases they are considering, then those patients are just not getting it. So we're really pushing CDC to be more clear about the fact that there are these patients that are very much similarly situated to other conditions, like pulmonary conditions that are definitely known to be at higher risk, so that states do start to allow patients with these rare diseases to get the vaccine during this third prioritization level or at any point.
Yeah, thank you, Rachel. And you already laid out some of those challenges that individuals are facing right now in the rare disease community in accessing the COVID-19 vaccine. We have a really great question from DJ, who submitted a question asking, how come some states allow those with disabilities and rare diseases to obtain the vaccine and others do not? Why do we seem to have this state-by-state approach to this issue? Perhaps it kind of goes back to some of the fabric of our public health system in the very first place within this country. But what are your thoughts on that? Why does it seem like some states are allowing access while some other states are not?
You know, I think it's so different from state to state. It's hard to really say. I mean, we know that it in many cases is simply a supply issue, that they are having, you know, a tremendous number of frontline workers come forward and get the vaccine, and they simply don't have enough to give to other people. But in other cases, it's, you know, like I just laid out, that they're following CDC's, you know, the words on CDC's website, which doesn't explicitly say rare diseases or provide an opportunity for a provider or a doctor of someone with a rare disease to say, hey, look, this patient really needs it. They're at very high risk. So there's no process like that in many states. And, you know, unfortunately, we're seeing very few that are, you know, doing what we would say they need to be doing, which is having this process for including those with rare diseases at high risk. So it really varies, I think, is the short answer.
Yeah, no, that's very well said. And we have a great comment from Liz here in the chat box here that she's having to think outside the box for her vaccine inclusion criteria. They don't list her specific rare disease, but that's some of the diseases that are listed are featured perhaps within her disease experience. So rare disease patients, again, unfortunately, having to get creative and having to really advocate for themselves to be able to obtain a vaccine in a system that hasn't been thinking about them. Let's turn to the pediatric part of the rare disease patient community. As we know, the vaccines that are authorized right now, they're authorized. One of them is for individuals 16 and older. The other is for 18 and older. So what can we expect for kids with rare diseases? When may they be able to obtain the COVID-19 vaccine?
Yeah, so, you know, I think the important thing to remember here is the context for how quickly we got to a vaccine. This is literally historic that, you know, the pandemic essentially started early last year, and here we are with 2 vaccines that are just incredibly effective. So it was very quick that we got to this point, and the clinical development programs with these vaccines were by design targeted to adults, which we know and learned in short order that adults tend to, on the whole, have much worse outcome than kids. So the vaccine development program started with the adult population, 16 and over is what, as Paul just said, got authorized by the FDA. We have heard that the vaccines are now moving into testing in the pediatric population. I don't think we can say for sure when those trials will wrap up. I think we can expect they'll be faster than the ones for the adults because they can build on a lot of the learnings they had from those adult clinical trials. But hopefully we will have an FDA, I think in this case it will be authorized, EUA, emergency use authorization for kids, in the next few months. But so much just depends on the outcome of those clinical trials and how quickly FDA reviews it. But we do know they're underway. So that's a very positive thing.
Absolutely, 100%. So we have a lot of great questions on the COVID-19 vaccines and access to it, but we still have a lot we want to cover during today's webinar on some other topics. So if we have time at the end, we're going to come back to COVID-19 related questions. I want to move to our third topic for the webinar, and that is therapeutic development within rare diseases. With a lot of folks in the rare disease community facing access challenges to the vaccine, we also know over 90% of individuals with rare diseases don't have a therapy that's indicated specifically for their disease that's been approved by the FDA. So Rachel, NORD, of course, has been a leader on this issue for over 35 years now. And I wanted to ask you, what incentives exist to encourage the biopharmaceutical industry to develop treatments for individuals with rare diseases?
The primary incentives that exist are provided for under the Orphan Drug Act, which we mentioned here. That was the law that was developed in 1983 that I said that NORD worked alongside Mr. Waxman and Senator Hatch at the time to get into place, because there was a recognition that for very small patient populations, the pharmaceutical industry just didn't have reason to develop them, because simply put, there wasn't at the time going to be a way to recoup the investment in developing those. Clinical trials are expensive, and so as the pharmaceutical industry at the time looked at their options, they would go toward conditions for which there are very large patient populations where they could make the money back quite easily. So that made sense at the time. So Congress recognized that there was a need for something else to spur the development of these drugs, because there was great need. Abby Myers, who founded NORD, worked with many other advocates at the time, patients, parents of kids with rare diseases, and really brought to the fore the need for something to spur development of these conditions. So the Orphan Drug Act provides for a variety of incentives. If you want to go to the next slide and we can talk about those. There we go, like magic. So there are 4 primary incentives under the ODA. The first one is basically that if you develop a product for a patient population of under 200,000 individuals in the United States, you get the first 7 years for just that indication. So for just that use of the drug in the rare disease population, you get 7 years without any competition from a generic version of that drug, or now we have biologics with what are called biosimilar version of the drug. So that's a real incentive for a pharmaceutical company looking at it. They can say, hey, for 7 years, we won't have anyone cutting into our ability to recoup our investment in those products. There also is, under the Orphan Drug Act, a tax credit, so that if you invest in developing these products, and like I said, there's clinical trial expenses and they can be very expensive, you get 25% of that investment back in the form of a tax credit. There also are grants that the Orphan Drug Act provides for research into rare disease drug development, and those can go to anyone who's doing qualifying research for those rare diseases. And then finally, when companies submit applications to FDA to review their products, they have to pay what's called a user fee. And they can be pretty substantial because there's a lot of work at the FDA that goes into reviewing those products. Those fees can be waived if you're submitting an Orphan Drug Act application. So pretty important incentives, and I think there's been an incredible track record of success here. In the years before the ODA was enacted, there were only about 30 treatments for rare diseases, and now we're up to over 800 orphan indications on different products. So that's 800 diseases for which we now have the FDA saying this product can safely and effectively treat this condition.
Yeah, that's absolutely remarkable progress and can certainly be charted directly from when the ODA was enacted in 1983. Are there other incentives, other programs that help push biopharmaceutical companies towards developing treatments for rare diseases? And Mark, we can move to the next slide on this one.
Yeah, there are a lot of other programs, particularly coming out of FDA, that really help the development of these products along. In the last few years, there's something that Congress passed a law about called the Rare Pediatric Disease Priority Review Voucher Program. And there's another acronym that we usually use, the PRV program. And that's basically if you develop a product for a qualifying rare pediatric disease, you get a voucher essentially for what is an expedited review by the FDA. So you can turn it in for one of your own products and say, FDA, here it is, you got to review this one quickly, and that allows you to get the product, assuming FDA approves it, on the market that much sooner. You can also take that voucher and sell it to a different pharmaceutical company who would like to use it for a product of theirs that maybe would not have otherwise gotten a quick review from the FDA. And they can charge a lot of money for that can then be directed hopefully back into the development of additional rare pediatric diseases or whatever that company wants to put it towards. So there's that. FDA also has several different programs that get to the sort of expedited review of these products. So in many cases, products for rare diseases are very difficult and scientifically complicated to develop and really benefit from additional guidance and help from FDA. So there's some programs at FDA, and there's several of them that we don't need to get into, but that really say, oh, you're developing a very exciting new product for this rare disease. We at FDA are going to make the decision to give you more attention. You're going to get more time from our reviewers who will spend more time with you, particularly in the early stages of developing these products, to give you their best advice on how to develop it. So that helps to shorten the timeline to develop the product and get it to FDA for its review. And those are really appealing, particularly to rare disease drug companies that maybe have not been in the business for decades, like some of the much larger pharmaceutical players that really could benefit from that advice. So those are just some examples.
Yeah, absolutely. There are plenty of programs in existence that do try to encourage the biopharmaceutical industry to develop therapies for rare diseases. And Rachel, you just outlined them perfectly. To move on to the next slide, it's not all about just trying to incentivize therapeutic development. FDA also has a number of other programs that try to get patients involved in the ongoing development or potentially a regulatory review at FDA. There's also other programs that focus on data that the FDA is running that is centered again around rare diseases. Tell us a little bit more about these programs.
So this is a really exciting new program that NORD was chosen for by the FDA and is implementing in partnership with the Critical Path Institute. FDA looked at the types of applications they were getting for rare diseases and really saw a lot of problems with the data that they were getting. Many times, there were applications that were submitted with data that just wasn't up to FDA's standards, and FDA then had no choice but to say, we can't approve this drug. So they were seeing this over and over again and really wanted to figure out a way to address that. How can we get more quality, consistent, and standardized data, particularly in the rare disease space, so that when these applications come to us, they're all ready to go. And we can say, oh, great, you have collected all this data from the patients who are going to be benefiting from it in a consistent way, and we can review it and make a decision instead of having a lot of back and forth with the applicants. So NORD has what is called a registry program, which is particularly important in the rare disease space where there's not a lot known about these conditions. So it allows patients to implement a registry for their particular disease, collect information about what are the symptoms of this particular rare disease, because in many cases we don't even know what they are. They, in many cases are the same across all the patients with that rare disease, and in many cases they're different, but they still all have the same rare disease. So registry data is one of the sources of information that FDA has said they're willing to look at as part of these rare disease applications, but it needs to be quality data. So the idea of this Cures Accelerator program in general is to really standardize the collection of this data. Critical Path Institute does a great job of collecting data from all different kinds of sources and getting it sort of to a state where it can be, fit for regulatory purposes. So we are partnering with FDA on this and getting this program rolled out, and just super excited about it. I put the link to the website there. This is run by NORD's research department. So if anyone has questions about how to get involved, I'm happy to connect you with those people.
Splendid. Thank you, Rachel. We just have one more question on this topic before we go through a few other NORD programs for everybody to consider getting involved in, and then hopefully we'll have a few minutes at the end for all the great questions you all are putting into the Q&A box. We see you there. We're going to try to get there. But before we do that, actually, I'm sorry, there's one more question here and then another one following this, and that is how can individuals in the rare disease community get involved in all of these exciting things at the FDA? We've been talking about all these programs that are really fantastic in trying to accelerate rare disease therapeutic development. But for all the folks who are on the webinar with us today, how could they get involved?
So, I think that it's such an exciting time at the FDA because, and this has been sort of developing over the last few years, they have really made a commitment to hearing directly from patients. They have done so much in terms of building up a staff at FDA that is there solely to interact with patients and really implement and pull in the patient experience of their conditions and what they're seeking in different treatments for that condition into the review process. So you see here, this is actually from FDA's website, the patient-focused drug development. There's information on their website about how to do that. They organize some, and NORD has organized a couple for different conditions where we bring patients to the FDA to say, here's what it's like living with this disease or condition on a daily basis, and here's what I wish a treatment would do to help me. So there's that. As you see here, this is also from FDA's website. NORD works with FDA to implement various listening sessions where, again, patients come together to just explain to the people at FDA what their disease is, what it's like. So they're just, I put, again, the link here to FDA's website. They really do have an open door and to patients coming to them, and I think there are just some really great opportunities, and these are just a couple of them to get involved with their work.
Absolutely, well said. We know that within the neuromuscular disease community, there have been a few communities that have done listening sessions, including the VCP and the limb-girdle communities. And as for patient-focused drug development, there have been meetings for Pompe disease, for spinal muscular atrophy, for Friedreich's ataxia, the list goes on. So plenty of opportunities that individuals across the neuromuscular community are getting involved in. And if you're interested, I'm sure you could as well. Okay, so now let's move on to the next slide. And this, I believe, will be the final question within this topic. With an approved therapy comes paying for that therapy. And we know that rare disease treatments can be very expensive. But as we've discussed, they can also save lives. And these prices, some argue, are necessary to maintain innovation within the space. So how is NORD approaching this tension?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really difficult question, and I think we know that, you know, drug pricing is one of the top concerns for Americans. I mean, poll after poll has shown that the price that patients are being asked to pay at the counter or in the hospital is one of the biggest concerns that patients have. And Congress has really responded, and the states also. I mean, this is one of the most active issues at both the federal and state levels. Obviously now the pandemic is here, and that has taken center stage, rightly so. But I think when hopefully soon the pandemic starts to end, I think we're going to see Congress really turn back to activity around drug pricing and try to find some way to address the experience that patients have. So in the rare disease space, it's very complicated because by definition, rare diseases treat small patient populations. So if a company's investing a lot of money in that product, they have to be able to recoup their investment, or otherwise they wouldn't do it. So when you're dividing that investment along or among a smaller patient population, the price ends up being higher in many cases. On the other hand, NORD, you know, really wants patients to be able to access those drugs. So we've always approached it, and I think the Orphan Drug Act itself is a perspective of balance. On the one hand, you have to have incentives for innovation in small patient populations. On the other hand, you have to have access. You have to have the ability to afford the drugs when they're available. Otherwise, what good are they? So our drug pricing principles that we put out really tried to set forth how we think about drug pricing for the rare disease community, which is it's got to be a balance. It has to be a balance between making sure that industry is interested in developing these drugs, and on the other hand, patients have to be able to afford it. So that's much easier said than done. And we've been engaging on drug pricing in a lot of different ways, again, at the federal and state level. But it's a huge priority for NORD.
Yeah, absolutely. And it certainly is a challenge trying to resolve that tension. There is no perfect right answer, sadly. So now let's move to the next slide. And Rachel, I think I'm going to turn it over to you for a couple exciting projects the NORD has ongoing.
Yeah, so really quickly, because I know we have some questions we want to get to, just wanted to flag, you know, we've talked about how to get involved at the state level, engagement at the state level. NORD has recently rolled out the Project RDAC, which is Rare Disease Advisory Council. And basically what this is a body at the state level comprised of a wide swath of the community who's interested in rare disease issues, to basically create a council that is there to assess the needs of the rare disease community in a certain state, and then advocate for those needs within the state government, to really serve as a resource to state policymakers, the regulatory agencies in the state, and have a sort of go-to body within the state for all rare disease patients and caregivers. So we are working to get these in every state, and basically just wanted to make everybody aware of it. We've got coalitions that are being formed in various states, and all this information is on our website that you could get involved in. We would urge you to get involved in. We need more people working at the state level to help us on this. And we've got toolkits that we're rolling out that really spell out what we've seen works at the state level. So, you know, how do you build the coalition? What should the legislation look like? And then what do you do with it at the end? If you want to go to the next slide. So we have 16 states now that have one in place. which is great. We have others, the orange states are the RDECs that are actually in progress. And our goal is to get RDECs in every state. So that's just a quick snapshot of where we are now. I'm gonna go to the next slide. And then I mentioned this earlier, again, just wanted everyone to know that our state report card resource exists. It covers newborn screening and a whole bunch of other issues. If you want to go to the next slide, I think they're just other slides on this. Yeah, so this is the purpose of the state report card. And next slide tells you where it is, I believe. Yeah. You are able to, under our new format this year, to download the state that you're in and see how they measure up on every single issue. There's background information on the issues we looked at, and all of it's right there. So I will stop there so we have time to get to other questions.
Great. Thank you all very much. We have 8 minutes for questions, so please let them come. You know, we have gotten a lot of good questions about the vaccine, and we're just trying to figure out how we can answer them because every state is so different. So I'm wondering if maybe Rachel, Paul, or Brittany, you can just kind of address the sentiment that we're seeing in the chat. So we're seeing a lot of people talk about how they're having access troubling it because their states might not have their condition listed, or they just don't qualify even though they think they should, or it's really hard to get a vaccine right now. I don't know if we can actually answer each individual question, so maybe we could just address the sentiment we're hearing and maybe just address maybe what we see going forward and what we actually are doing to try to help address it. That's probably the best way I can think of it.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, unfortunately, just quickly scanning through the Q&A, I mean, these are stories we're hearing all the time. I don't think there really is a state that someone would say is doing great on this, which is awful, and why we are working so hard, you know, along with MDA to try to really push the government, the federal government at the very least, to put out the guidance that we talked about. I mean, the Kaiser put out some information, and this is reflected in our letter, you know, that shows that states really are going by, to the extent they are in that category where they're providing vaccines for the high-risk conditions, states really are going by what CDC's website says. And what CDC's website says is not doing the trick. It's not making it clear enough that rare disease patients are, in many cases, just like these other high-risk conditions. So we're really working hard to push them on that. And, you know, it's really difficult. And, you know, we know that, and we're doing everything that we can. I don't know, Paul, if you have other things to add.
Yeah, Rachel, I certainly would emphasize that last point that you were making about really trying to encourage CDC to do more, because, you know, there are 63 jurisdictions making these decisions right now, and NORD and MDA and all these other partnering organizations can try to go to every single jurisdiction and encourage them to do better. But I can tell you, maybe the number one entity that these jurisdictions listen to when it comes to these things is the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. So if we're successful in encouraging the CDC to better encourage the states and jurisdictions to include those with rare diseases within their processes, that way we may be able to improve all of these, improve upon all of these challenges that we're seeing right here in the chat box, of course, but then outside as well. One thing I would add as well, Rachel, is keep doing everything for all the advocates here. Keep doing what you're doing right now. Tell us about the challenges you're facing in accessing the vaccine, because it's one thing for NORD or MDA or whomever to go to the CDC or go to whatever decision maker and say, you know, hey, there's a lot of challenges right now with individuals with rare diseases accessing the vaccine. But if we're able to go to Washington State and we're able to tell Donna, tell them your story, or Hannah, tell them your story for that matter, or Liz, go to Pennsylvania and tell them yours. That is a whole lot more powerful than us just saying in kind of general terms that those with rare diseases are having challenges accessing the vaccine. So, you know, keep telling MDA about this. Email us at advocacy@mda.usa. MDAUSA.org, excuse me. And Rachel, is there a way for those in the rare disease community to contact NORD as well with these kinds of stories? Is there a survey? Is there a inbox? How would you recommend advocates getting in touch with NORD with these kinds of stories?
We have several different, I can get the link for, or the email address for everyone, but the easiest one that would come directly to our department is raredisorders.org. No, rare diseases. Sorry. I'll put it in the chat. So yeah, I mean, sending them directly to us. And just to echo what you were saying, Paul, about the, the power of the stories. I actually, just before this call, talked to the woman who was on the recent town hall in Wisconsin with the president. And she stood up and asked a question telling her story about her son who has a rare disease and describing exactly these problems, that she hasn't been able to get it for him. He, in the town hall, said, I want to follow up with you. And since then, she has gotten several different calls from people in the White House. She's gotten a lot of press attention around it. So, I mean, and that's just one person's story. So we're going to be talking to her more about sort of how to capitalize on that. But just to echo what you said, Paul, I mean, the power of telling the story and making sure that people hear about these experiences just cannot be understated.
We have a few additional questions as well within the chat box that are a little bit more specific to neuromuscular diseases. Someone asks just simply, is it safe to take the vaccine? First and foremost, always talk to your doctor about these medical decisions. We at MDA, the four of us here on the call aren't medical professionals. MDA as an organization can't give medical advice. I believe that's also true with NORD for that matter. So talk to your doctor about whether the vaccine is right for you. And then another question about whether rare diseases and neuromuscular disorders in particular could develop serious side effects from the COVID-19 vaccine. Now, nothing that the clinical trials have shown would lead us to believe that to be the case. But again, this is something to talk with your physician about. This is something to talk with whoever your medical provider is about, because they and you know your situation the very best. And they are going to be able to make, and you, of course, the right decision for yourself about the vaccine. So that's always the place to start when it comes to making personal medical choices. Mark, do we have any other questions that would like to address in the chat box today?
Well, Paul, if I could just quickly add on to that, again, I would refer you back to the webinar that we did with MDA, where you would hear what the FDA officials have to say about both the safety and effectiveness of the vaccines that are there. I mean, again, they were there to answer the rare disease community's questions about the vaccine. So please do go and listen to what they said on that. And we'll get you that link.
We are at time. Go ahead, Brittany, please go ahead.
Here that just came up from Vicki, and I think it's a great question for us to end this call on. And she asked, what can we do to bring more attention to rare diseases at the local level? This is a really great question, and something that, that MDA and NORD both have a lot of shared passion for. So I'd just like to throw this last question to Rachel to answer, and then we'll go ahead and wrap up. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, again, I would really the whole point of our project RDAC is exactly that. It is to bring more attention to rare diseases at the state level of all sorts. I mean, and I think within the context of the RDACs, there's the opportunity to have, for instance, educational sessions with the state officials on particular rare diseases. I mean, it can get localized in a way that we're just really excited about. So again, the coalitions in states that don't have a rare disease advisory council at this point are in the process of getting going. So we've got this information on our website. There are upcoming meetings in a lot of different states. We have state policy staff from NORD who are working to get those set up. So we've got a lot of stuff going on with that. And you know, we also have our Rare Action Network, which you can sign up for on our website. We have state level Rare Action Network ambassadors in all the different states who advocate for state level rare disease issues too.
Thanks, Rachel. I know we have a lot of questions that we didn't get to here, so I will just share again that if there's anything further that anyone wants to discuss with the advocacy team at MDA, our email is advocacy@mdausa.org. Many thanks to Rachel and Nord for your continued partnership, and to everybody for joining us here on the call today. We will be posting the recording online on the advocacy site, so please feel free to share that with friends and family once it's up in the next 24 to 48 hours. Thanks, and have a great day.